music concerned. Mike, take us away from my awful humour. Talk about creativity, please.
Right, exactly. Creative, because it's a kind of a list, and we like a list with lots of points that are practical. And this is an article I got from the Harvard Business Review, which is saying. It doesn't say, I read it as, can you teach someone to be more creative, ? And it isn't that. The actual title is, you can. You can teach someone to be more creative. And I know that Daryl operates with teams a lot and presumably work with developing creativity.
I do a lot on innovation. And
right. So you'll be glad to hear you can.
Yes. Well,
you think you can?
I always believed it. I'm not sure that it's about teaching it. I think there is always a lot of creativity. Sometimes it's not labeled as being creative.
Yes.
Just by kind of the biases and how people look at creativity.
Yes, the article does point out that there may be different types of creativity. There are different requirements for different styles of creativity.
Yes.
So artistic creativity requires a different mindset to scientific creativity, where you're solving a problem and so on.
But maybe it's the obvious question, but is it teaching somebody, or are you just facilitating them tapping into what's already there?
I think, Daryl, you could answer that.
Yeah, well, I think for me, a lot of it's just allowing it to emerge and exist in the room, as opposed to shooting it down.
You can use exercises of different ways of thinking. So psychologists would tell you about the method of unrelated stimuli. So if the person who you're helping doesn't know this, and you show them a method of saying, how does your problem relate to that telephone on the desk there? So you've kind of taught them a method, but you've not actually taught them to be creative. You've just shown them a way of facilitating their own creativity.
Releasing their creativity.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's tapping into kind of what's there. I mean, my son's really good at art, but he has been taught how to draw a face in proportion because there's a method to use, but he still has to, kind of draw the face.
Well, I think that story, David, goes back to the quote you
Picasso.
like so much about Picasso. You want to share
that?
Shall I
read it out to you? Yeah, I'm just trying to find it so I get it exactly right, but I can't. Picasso said that you need to learn the rules like a pro so that you can break them like an artist. Which is what I was always taught about artistic, was you need to know. Lowry was a tremendous technician. Those stickmen are very, very cleverly produced.
Yeah.
So his crew, it's not called crude, is it? I've forgotten the term for it. But anyway, primitive, exactly. Yeah. That primitive style is a well-practiced style. It's not just primitive.
Yeah. But you understand the rules, if there's that, but then you break them, and that's when it becomes truly creative.
But going back to your son and his drawing, my wife's a really good artist and did her bachelor's degree in art.
Wow.
But she's argued that you've got to learn the basics, the draftsmanship, the can you draw what you see in front of you, and then you go crazy. Then you start distorting it like Picasso did, or whatever you're doing with it. But you really do have to have those fundamentals about learning.
Because even if it has an unusual proportion, it has a sort of a life-filled sort of.
I think for this article, though, for me, guys, the most interesting. There's a British social scientist called Michael Curtin who's worked on creativity, and he's got a tool for measuring it. But one of the concepts he's brought in that I think is most helpful for people is about valuing different kinds of creativity. He talks about some people are what he calls adaptive creative. They take what they see and make it a little bit better. Incremental improvement. We'll tweak it. The Japanese used to be the stars of this.
Kaizen principle.
Yeah, it's exactly Kaizen. But there's an adaptive creativity that's very valuable, and it works. We don't change major things, but we just make things a little bit better, and it adds up. And then at the other end of the scale, he talks about people who are what he calls, they're I'm blocking on the word now. Adaptive creative. You have adaptive creative, and I'm blocking on the word now. Can't think of it. I'm having. I'm really.
You could run the Green Party. You could run the Green Party.
But the other end of the scale is people that are radically innovative, and they don't want to make things different. They don't want to make things better. They want to make things different. And the tolerance between the two people, how they see each other. They both see each other as sticks in the mud or crazy, and they don't listen to each other.
Yeah, they would be opposite ends of the spectrum, and You and I were discussing before we came back on air about this article. The final, as I say, it's in the Harvard Business Review, and it's titled "You Can Teach Creativity," but it talks about teams. There are basic suggestions that managers can follow in order to boost the creative output of their teams. Balance differences and similarities in your team. So high-performing teams tend to be similar in values. They're motivated by the same stuff, but different in styles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've all said it's fairly, it is difficult for some managers to actually live with people, different styles.
Well, and the point that's made in that article, they talk about it, which fits with Curtin's theory about they're innovators at the top end, is that if you want blue sky, crazy ideas, you get innovators to tell you, let's do this and let's do that, and it's really crazy, but they're not the right people to implement it.
No.
You need those more pragmatic people further down the scale that are much more adaptive and will figure out how to make it work.
But
Completer finishers.
Yeah. Well, they're just more pragmatic and adaptive. They'll make it work. Whereas I'll be saying, let's just build something that'll take us to Mars.
One of the books I read in the literature about psychology and creativity, it makes one of the points it makes is that, do you really define it as creative if it's never actually come into reality? It's just a whimsical thought.
Ethereal.
There is always the hard work attached to creativity by bringing something to fruition.
Yeah, and there's a cycle that you can actually map out with a group that shows them how it should shift down to being implemented by, in a very practical way. And that those people that originally spurred the idea on should become less involved and just more advisor or troubleshooters later on, because if you're not careful with it, they'll come back in late in the process and try to say that's not even a good idea. I've got a new way of doing it.
A better way of doing it. Yeah, we never get anywhere. This one, the second item is avoid having too many creatives, and it may be touching on this point, Gerald. Idea generators are critical to the team, but they'll only be implemented if the team also comprise people who love execution.
Yes,
and I suppose the creatives they need to get out of the way and let them do it.
I can remember doing an exercise Mark's familiar with where it's a team exercise and you try to move the whole team through a kind of, we call it minefield, and you got to work your way. Yes. And we had a team of academics that ended up on 6 different islands screaming at us that they'd been set up and conned because there wasn't any way to do it.
They're academics.
And they each had their ideas, and they just went off and got their own platform and stood on it.
The final point, which I do like as well, is embrace failure. It's become a cliche, but it's true. Too many managers pretend to embrace creativity, but they don't really care enough about it to promote it and live with this idea of you've got to fail to have, if you're going to have a creative idea. And I've got a company that have meetings, and the specific creative meeting is the crap idea meeting. The Museum of Rubbish Ideas is where everybody has to share things that are rubbish and never going to fly. Then you go back in the Museum of Rubbish Ideas one day and you look at 2 things, you put them together and you make a third, which is actually very useful. So I think those rubbish ideas probably stored away could prove valuable.
They can happen. And, embracing failure